Because as soon as people know stuff like that, they're like, oh. As soon as,
Yeah, they'll probably feel a bit stupid, to be honest with you, a lot of the time.
as soon as when I found out what that word meant, I was like, fucking hell,
Fuck's sake, yeah.
can't believe
Try
how.
to think back to who has said that in front of, you know?
Yeah, I'm like writing down a list of people that have said that to like
Yeah.
message them on Facebook and be like, do you know you're a fucking hater?
You get him, Scott.
So I've been watching the Olympics this week as well, and I've been, like I say, I watch all sorts of fucking sports when the Olympic comes on. I literally watch fucking anything. Like the skate or like the skateboarding the Street Olympics, and I was like, I don't like skateboarding. It fucking came on at 2 a.m. You bet your ass I was watching it. And it was fucking lit is what it was. The skateboarding was great. It was so fun to watch. They did like 2 runs and then they did like 5 tricks after that. And they took their 4 best scores, which I thought was a little unfair actually. I feel like your runs should be weighted a bit heavier. But I guess they're teething it out.
Yeah, well, it's the first time they're ever doing it, aren't they?
Yeah. So at the weekend, the rugby sevens came on, and obviously because it's Tokyo, it's on at like super late at night. Like it's on during the morning hours for us.
Right.
So at the weekend, the rugby sevens came on at night time, and just to give you a bit of background for what I was thinking about this week, the rugby sevens is like, rugby's normally played with like 15 people on each side, but it's because it's in the Olympics, it's only 7, so there's like a lot of space and stuff like that. So it's not
same size court.
I think it's the same size pitch. I think so, but there's much less players. So there's a lot of space, a lot more scoring, and the games are a lot shorter.
Okay.
But rugby's like quite a crunching sport though. Like the guys that play rugby are like they're huge, they're huge dudes. Like, and they fucking smash into each other and they drag each other to the ground, and it's like proper, really physical, really tough sport. And the British team are playing. The British team are pretty good, and they were winning their game. And one of the guys went into a tackle with one of the, I think it might have been a Canadian player, and he jumped into a tackle with him. And the British guy, had a ponytail, and the commentator said after the tackle, "I know he's got a ponytail, but he's tough."
Okay.
And I was like, sort of watching the game, like all of a sudden, alarm bell started ringing. I'm like, what kind of backlash is that guy going to get online?
Oh,
like,
right, okay.
How many complaints or Ofcom going to get for this like BBC commentator? I started thinking about, does he regret saying that? Are they going to cut that out of the highlights sort of thing?
I'm glad you said that, because I thought when you said alarm bells were going off, you were like thinking, what a fucking sexist.
Yeah, alarm bells were going off, and I was like, that guy better be fucking fired.
Yeah. You're typing in already. Get on to it.
Yeah, I meant complaints from me. I didn't mean from like randoms on Twitter.
Okay.
But it seems like these days, I kind of my kind of train of thought kept on going, and I thought to myself, it seems like these days people will be offended at like anything. They'll even like look for things to be offended.
It'll never be enough.
And it seems like literally when anything is said online or someone comments about, when someone says something like that, whether it's to do with, if it's to do with like gender or if it's to do with sexuality or anything like that, it immediately gets totally scrutinized. Like someone's offended, and there's a big group that comes to their aid and stuff like that. And it seems to come in the form like when someone says anything that's like criticism, when someone says anything that's like comedy, or there are people out there that do spread like actual hate.
Sure.
So I started like wondering like what the difference between like hate speech is and like freedom of speech, or like criticism, or just comedy, or just speech in general, because there's like, for me, there's like a difference between hate speech and like all the other speech, obviously, but the line that seems to be drawn between those two things seems to be like subjective, and some people's line for hate speech is like way over. So the guy put in this tackle, and the commentator said, I know he's got a ponytail, but that guy's tough. What was your initial takeaway to that line?
I'm the same as you. When I hear that line, it's one of those ones that like I immediately, my ears kind of prick up a bit, because I'm like, oh, that's just something that could be construed the wrong way. Like it's something that if I heard that in my work, I'd be like, I'd maybe gauge who I'm talking to. I'm like, would any one of these fucking squeal, about something like that? Personally though, it's one of those things that I think that's so fucking harmless. True, I like harmless. I understand. I can understand how people could be offended by that. I can't imagine any dude with a ponytail actually being pissed off, though.
Well, you can see. So it seems to me like the people that would be annoyed are saying something along the lines of, ponytail's like a long haircut. It's normally like a female haircut because the guy's like sort of similar to a woman. All of a sudden he can't be tough. But it seems like you have to like skip a few stages to like jump to that conclusion. Because when I heard it, like you said, my ears pricked up a little bit, and I was like, oh, and I started thinking about if this guy's going to face some repercussions, like his director's going to be in and be like, don't fucking say that again. But then I started to think about what he said though, and we've done a bit of dissection on things like masculine and feminine traits on the show. We've done a bit about like the hate machine online, like criticism people receive. Now, if you think about this guy's thought process, right? He's thought ponytail's like a long hairstyle, which is quite feminine, right? Women tend to have longer hair, guys tend to have shorter hair, so longer hairstyles are kind of feminine. Being tough is quite a masculine trait, which you would disassociate with feminine traits, obviously. So the hairstyle is quite feminine, but the guy is overall still quite masculine. That's the point he's making,
Yeah, which is valid.
Now, if you go all the way along that thought process, there was no derogatory thing that was said there. Like he didn't imply that women can't be tough
because they sometimes have ponytails. Exactly.
All he said was something that is traditionally feminine in a ponytail doesn't necessarily mean that this guy isn't still masculine, because he's still tough, he's still playing rugby, he's still doing this like really masculine activity. He never said at any point that any of those things were bad. He just pointed out the disassociation with how masculine he was being to the feminine side of his haircut.
But I would argue that there is, like, to me, there is a kind of an implicit association there of men having ponytails being traditionally effeminate. And that is something that you could theoretically construe offence from, basically saying that this physical trait implies femininity type of thing. And I think there might be some, particularly for the older generations, like I think most guys in like the 90s that were cutting around with like long hair, they were like either hippies or, Poke would probably call them weird, and you can understand where that would be less traditionally masculine, right?
Sure. I mean, I can understand how you would construe offence from it, but I think what kind of stands out for me is the way that this guy is like saying it. Obviously, he's not like meaning to offend anyone. He's not. He's not being derogatory in any way. Like,
listen to his tone and stuff.
Like, at no point was he like trying to offend someone, or he wasn't saying that he thought that being feminine was bad or anything like that. He was just pointing out this weird disassociation in his mind. So like, he wasn't going out his way to hurt anyone, but you can just see the people online like jumping on this bandwagon, being like, I can't believe he said that, like, sort of thing, like he's like the worst guy in the entire world. Now, so I'm talking about like hate speech, and it's clearly a joke this guy's made. He's just made this like offhand joke. He obviously doesn't think women can't be tough, or women are worse than men, or being feminine is like bad, or being masculine is like better, or anything like that. He's just made an offhand joke. So the line between hate speech and like freedom of speech, or like jokes, for us seems to be sort of like in a relatively reasonable place, I would say. But for the people that would view this as like hate speech, or would view this as like offensive, their line seems to be like a bit further over. So it got me thinking, like, what is hate speech? Like, what makes something hate speech as opposed to something else, as opposed to freedom of speech, as opposed to a joke, as opposed to a criticism? Like, what makes it hate?
Right. Well, I definitely think that in this scenario, we're talking about someone mislabeling. I think the categorically this wasn't hate speech. Before we even like think about of what would actually define it as, I guess when I immediately come to my immediate like gut reaction to the definition of hate speech would be speech that's inherently prejudice, I suppose, and also has the intention of hurting another party, right?
Yeah, I think that is like generally the definition of it. It's like promoting or like inciting or even like by accident sort of like spreading like a prejudicial message, like a hate message towards like a certain group.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what makes something like hate speech though? Like for you to like say something and for it to become hate as opposed to just a joke or something that you're saying, because you can say something that's like prejudicial
Mm-hmm.
as like a joke, and it's like irony sort of thing. That's not hate speech.
Well,
though,
that's
right?
the thing. Yeah. Like that's what's it's curious, isn't it? You know, like someone can say, you know, God, I'm trying to think of an example now. You never can at the spot, but you know, someone can say, "Oh, making fun of like fucking extremely right wing people." Let's say, "Oh, let's burn all the gays," you know, and you know that they are joking. You know they do not want to burn the gays. But if another person said that, "Let's burn all the gays," that would be hate speech because they actually meant it. You know, so you can have people saying the exact same words, and it can be construed in completely different ways. So obviously there's an aspect of the intention of the speaker, but then how are we able to dissociate the intention of the speaker if we're just reading like a text message, you know?
Sure.
Like there has to be something.
There's probably something to be said for like who you're talking to as well. Like, you know, you and I can have conversations and like you'll say something that, and I know you're joking, but if you were to like tweet the same thing out, you know,
right, it might be a bit.
It would be construed. You might get a bit of like backlash for it from the dozens of people that have subscribed to this channel. You know.
Oh yeah.
God. Yeah. So I couldn't imagine that. I've gone back and deleted all my tweets actually, just in case that happens one day.
By the way, we've lost one sub this month.
Yeah, I did notice that. So whoever, I guess they're not watching anymore. Actually, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that there's something to be said about the intention and like knowing like the company that you're in. Like you wouldn't say burn all the gays to someone that you just met at your work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And like I'm saying that as an example. That's like a terrible joke. But like if you were to say like when this guy said the thing about the ponytail, it was like, huh, like sort of thing. You like
sure, you'd be like, yeah,
no,
I got it.
But then all these people online probably gave him like backlash for it. I think the first thing that I think about when it comes to like hate speech before I get like angry or upset or before I started to like think about it or get offended by it is, did that person just try to offend someone? Like, are they meaning offense in what they're saying? And see, to be honest, if the answer is yes to that question, I'm not even sure the people that the answer would be yes to are like worth your anger, because I'm not sure they can be like convinced not to hate people. Because if they're going out their way to like spread hate speech, like they're obviously doing it from a place of like hatred. You know, if you're talking about like women being worse than men or black people being worse than white people, if someone says something like that and actually believes it, you obviously don't have any evidence of that. You know what I mean? Because people aren't worse than each other. People are like the same. So they've based this opinion on like absolutely nothing.
Probably anecdotes
or
what
what they've construed to be evidence. And it's like, well, if they've convinced themselves, there can't be any amount of evidence you can bring to the table that would like convince them otherwise, right?
Yeah. I with true hate speech, that's I think that does hit it on the head. It has to be intention to try and like, you know, hurt someone or the group that you're going against. And you're right. See someone that would actually do that would like be stupid as take like a blanket statement and try to genuinely offend a group or person just because they like hate them because of like some internalized prejudice. That's just something everybody you just leave alone. The reason they're doing that is because they're trying to get a rise out of you. And so much of the time they do it. I mean, it's literally fucking trolling. This is not a new concept. It's been around for ages. It's almost like a futile attempt to even do that.
I think there is something about it that's just about getting a rise. And that's when I was also thinking about, because we speak about this all the time, and I think you and I have got slightly different opinions on like what should, like, about things like language and about like what you can and can't say. But I think when it comes to hate speech, I think to myself, should we do anything about it? And I'm like, personally for me, hate speech gives me like a great indicator of like who to avoid. Now, having said that, I've never really experienced it. Like, I'm not part of like a minority group, or I'm not gay, so I'm not like.
But you see people online that say shit, and you're like, well, what? That's a fucking, just cross him off the list. He's not going to be someone I ever dedicate time to.
But it doesn't personally affect me, so I don't have any experience with it. But in that sense, where I'm like, I know who to avoid. It seems like there's like a social correction that's like going on, as opposed to like, I'm not saying like you should outlaw words sort of thing, but like. When people say the words, you're like, nah. Like, someone like says the N word, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, especially if they call someone the N word, I'm like, oh, okay, right. You're
yeah.
Like I'm like on the naughty list, like sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a huge difference there, isn't there, between actually trying to use like a racial slur and call someone that. That's one of those cases where it's like a no-brainer. You're talking to a racist that is an idiot, and you should not worry about them. Like, I say it all the time, man. I as you said, we do have different views when it comes to communication. I genuinely believe that, see these people that are like being like sprouting vitriol, let them sprout them. Let them say whatever the fuck they want. Let them deal with the consequences of what they say. I don't think I don't personally think you should be trying to shut them up. It's because then they can just hide. Like let them do it. But like you said, and like we talked about in that episode a couple of times back, there will be, more often than not, like social correction that try and like oust these people.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking about when it came to like dealing with racists like online on social media. When I was talking about like putting names to like Twitter accounts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I get that kind of social correction. But I honestly don't think these people are like worth your time though. They're not worth you trying to convince them, and you shouldn't even bother, to be honest.
They want their eyes.
Yeah, just totally ignore them and hope that, like, because I think that society is like correcting it just now. I think as we're pushing towards like a more progressive sort of state and we're more acceptance, I think society is trying to correct it as we're like going forward. But it's pretty clear that the guy that made the comment about the ponytail on the rugby sevens, like, he's not trying to offend anyone.
No.
He's not trying to do anything like that. The next thing I started to think about is this person like saying something hateful like by accident, but like they do actually think it, so they just like haven't identified like where the thought comes from, sort of thing. So when someone says something about like immigrants coming over and they make a sort of like throwaway comment, and you're like ask them why they said that, and they've not actually like came to like the root of the idea, they actually do think something that's like hateful, and they are like kind of spreading it, but they're doing so like unaware. That can be like hate as well. I don't think you don't specifically have to know like what you're doing when you spread hate. I don't think you can like be doing it totally subconsciously. Like, for example, like an uneducated person can like say a word that they didn't exactly know was like hate speech, but then turns out to be. And a good example of this is, a few months ago, there was a word that was used like when I was growing up, and the word was like half caste, and it meant somebody that was like mixed race.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what it meant, but it was like people said it when I was like growing up, and
it was a normal word.
And a couple of months ago, I like looked it up, and it turns out like caste comes from the Latin word pure, so it basically means half pure. And I'm like, what?
Mudbloods.
Like, well, shit, like that's fucking hate speech, But people were like saying it, and like they had like no idea.
You were, but it kind of like directly contravenes that first statement we said though, which is like, in order for it to be hate speech, you need to be trying to spread hate. Like, what you were doing was in no way spreading hate. You were using a word incorrectly. That's not spreading hate.
Oh, I don't necessarily think that the first thing that we said, like, that isn't like blanket like hate speech. I think that's like one of the forms of like hate speech that you can get. I think there are like different kinds.
I get where you're coming from, where you're talking about like unintentional hate speech. I get it. I think that, right, yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's like from like a place of ignorance, you know what I mean? So if you were to say the word like half caste to someone who was like mixed race, they could be like hold on a second, because you didn't know. Like these people are like your target audience when it comes to like hate speech, right? Like the uneducated people, the ones who just like say something and don't like know what they're saying, or haven't like really associated the thoughts in their mind. These are the people that you can like come to and like sort of like talk to about it.
Yeah, you're right. These people are the most likely that are able to be educated. It's because that's the only thing stopping them right now from acting any more considered way is education. So you're right. That's a really good point. I kind of this is pedantics. It's semantics. Sorry, you're right. But I kind of feel that maybe calling that hate speech might be a little unfair.
Sure,
Because the
right.
action is
Tars
inherently
them with the same brush and all that.
yeah. But you're right. I definitely I see what you mean. Like the act of doing so still spreads the poison that is bad race relations type of thing, or like sexism or whatever it is. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, also a good point. When you do see that, and when you do hear someone use a word, that is one of the examples where you'd be like, oh, by the way, do you realize you know what that word means type of thing. Whereas like if it's a racist and they know what they're using, that's when you walk away.
Yeah, sure. Those are the people that you can kind of educate, though.
Right.
The
Yeah, that's
problem
clever.
comes in, I think, when there's this backlash about it, and when the guy at the Rugby Seven says this, for example, I don't think this is hate speech at all. What he
No.
said, to be honest. But the problem is when people sort of like come at it at this like sort of holier than thou like position. Like we almost like spoke about this with like this guy's toast.
Yep.
When people kind of come at it and they're like trying to like educate, they're like, here's why you're like wrong, sort of thing. Here's why like what I'm telling you is like correct.
Let me just break it down for you here.
People come at like all like I spoke about people that know what they're doing and they're like spreading hate speech, and we spoke about people who like don't know what they're doing, they're a bit uneducated. I think you're right. The idea of like hate speech there's lots of just one big brush and it just tars everyone with it, and like the people who would have heard this like Rugby Sevens comment and would have gone online to talk about it, they just they don't like give a shit. They don't. They seem to like they skip a few stages in like the thought process of like what just happened there, and they just jump from 0 to 100. When it's like hate speech comes in all sorts of different forms, is what I'm kind of thinking now. Where I'm like, there's like knowing, there's like not knowing, there's also like comedy, which isn't hate speech, and they just kind of like they jump from 0 to 100 with like all of these things. They kind of seem to jump past a couple of stages of thought.
Yeah, I think actually, and I've talked about this several times when it comes to people online and like basically virtue signaling, as I genuinely do believe that people will either willfully or completely unaware of their own actions deliberately construe something that's not supposed to be offensive as offensive for the simple act that means that they get to talk about it.
Sure, they get,
so
and
like
they get the reaction online as well.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's because then they're able to educate people and look better, and they're also able to look better by the fact that they identified this. And like it's exactly like what we said with like the disguised toast. It was like people coming in just to inform them how they're wrong, and you actually should be thinking this way. I think there's so much of that, and that is where the line between why people seem to be finding the line between comedy and hate speech becoming blurred. It's because people are now looking at mediums which are deliberately I struggle to use the word offensive, but like humor is there to get you to think. It's to get a rise out of you. It's like I think that humor most of the time it tries to draw attention to facts about the world and make you think about it. So it might make a joke that seems racist, but the idea is that it gets you to think about the ridiculousness of someone being a racist. For an example, so like that, I believe that humor is oftentimes it tries to like basically hold a picture back at society and say this is what you're doing type of thing. These people that are almost like programmed to look for hate, they lose all that information, and that's like you said, those people in the middle ground that are like ignorant, like they don't care whether they're ignorant or not. They're not there to educate them. They're there to just find someone that is wrong so they can show the world. And I think that when it comes to talking about the conflation of hate speech and humor, that's such a huge problem we have today.
Well, humor is one of the ones where it's kind of mixes in everything that was spoke about so far. Because you talk about people that mean it, you talk about people that don't mean it, people that maybe that are ignorant or maybe that are trying to get a ruse. And I also need to think about the audience that you have, like knowing the person that's like telling the joke as well. Because
sure,
if a person is making a joke based on their actual opinion, if someone's making a joke about how women should like stay in the kitchen, and they like
that's
they actually think that, like, that's hate speech.
That's fucking yeah.
I get to that point where I'm like, that's hate speech, and that again,
sure.
That's one of the people where I'm like, okay, avoid because you're a fucking arsehole. But then there is people that are bringing it up like ironically. So humor's like this really
sexist jokes. Yeah,
humor's like this really niche area where like sort of amalgamates all of these zones, so it becomes like this like melting pot of. It's really difficult to distinguish, I guess, for people.
Yeah, it's easy pickings for these people, I think.
For people that are like looking for hate speech, they can just blanket all of it and they can just like fire straight towards it. And I guess I never thought about it the way that you're just saying now, where like humor does also sort of raise awareness to these jokes. Although recently I've started to think that the ironic jokes are becoming like a bit lazy. You know, like when like woke culture kind of became a thing and people started becoming more progressive. Like you'd make the jokes to make fun of like racists, you know, if you were to say for example, if you were to ironically say that like black people were worse than white people and you were like poking fun at a racist, not at the race you're talking about. Like those jokes are a bit old now, right?
If you do that over a long enough time, then everyone in the world will view you as a racist. You know, like you might think that you're still being ironic, but eventually, when it's all you ever do, it's no longer ironic, whether you mean it or not. Because I think you've actually probably indoctrinated yourself to thinking a way that you might not think it. You know,
what do we think about people? So, let's say, for example, someone makes a joke that's about sex. So I think a sexist joke, and the way that joke is like that the audience that hears the joke perceives it, you know, let's say half of them perceive it as a joke and the other half take it seriously, like they actually think that's this person's opinion. Does the person who's saying that have any responsibility then if they've told a joke and it's like sort of sexist,
it's not landed maybe, or
it has landed with half the group and the other half of the group, it could have landed with them as well, but they actually believe it, sort of thing. What is the responsibility there?
I think that's like a tough one, and it's a battle that's been fought for years now in comedy. I think it's like comedians are acutely aware that their circles have been targeted, and like the language that's used within comedians is dramatically changed. Like, and the example I always use when I talk about, you know, trying to not critique, sorry, but control humor as opposed to try and avoid potential hate, is the example with Joe Brand, who like made a joke maybe a year and a half ago. Yeah, I've told you about it before. I might have mentioned it on the guide, which basically where she was like talking about politicians, and she was like, I just highly advise everyone to find their nearest politician and throw a vat of acid in their face. And like, I think that's pretty funny. I can understand though how that sounds like hate speech, you know, because the joke itself is telling people to attack a specific group of the population, you know. That is,
and but that joke is also like, there's like two layers to it, where it's like sort of founded on truth, where she's like, I fucking hate politicians, you know what I mean? Like she's not saying go out and fucking, like, obviously that's a joke, but like there's like an inkling of like she actually doesn't like politicians, so she's like telling you to do something bad to someone she doesn't like, but she's like, oh, I was exaggerating it, and it's like,
that one hate speech. Then
that one really draws the line, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it's such a brilliant one, because it's like it really does get to that territory where it's like, ooh, maybe actually she shouldn't have made that joke, you know. And I'm like, it's hard. It's because should comedians be stifling their material based off of people construing it the wrong way? Should she just like apologize after she makes the joke, or should she just be like, that's a fucking joke, you may not have liked it, but fuck you guys?
Yeah, but it can be like their persona as well. Like I don't know if I've told you about this guy before, but I watched a guy called Anthony Jeselnik for a little bit, a couple of specials on Netflix, and like a lot of his stuff is like based on sort of like shock factor.
Right.
So it's got a couple of jokes that are like sort of the toe the line sort of thing. But that's like his persona, and like he doesn't like come out after the show and be like, guys, I'm not like that. He's like, it's his act, you know. That's like that's like who he is on the stage, and like if people see him off the stage, he kind of has to be like that. That's like his job, you know. He can't come off the stage and be like someone else,
fancy,
so that people can disassociate like who he is and like know it's like an act on stage. So he can't really come out and apologize for it, or like be like, I don't actually think that, guys, because people don't like respect him as much. They don't like think that's who he is. But I also have to wonder like how many people in his audience come to the shows because they are like homophobic or sexist and they enjoy the jokes, you know.
Yeah, I know. I feel that in recent years there's just been a backlash in general because dark humor is something that was quite prevalent, I thought, when we were kids. um like jokes that involved fucking race or like gay people or whatever, like these are jokes that people told in the playground all the time, like there's absolutely no doubt about it. And I don't think people were telling those jokes because they were racist or because they didn't actually like gay people. I think there was probably, I don't know, like, sure, if we were kids and there was mostly a lot of ignorance going on. I'm not trying to compare what's jokes in the playground to fucking what happens in comedy clubs, that type of thing. But I'm just trying to say that, like, I feel there's definitely been a shift in what's become acceptable now. And it feels that jokes which do kind of tote that line are becoming much, much riskier. And there are more and more people which are potentially losing jobs, and like comedians that are being like cancelled because their humor is just no longer considered safe enough. And I think that's a tremendous shame, unfortunately, because people should be aware. Like, can't we have the dissonance to realize?
Well, that has to be the thing, right? You have to like look at that comedian like making the jokes, and you have to like say to yourself, like, is this comedian a racist? Is this comedian a sexist? And if the answer is like no, like this guy Anthony Jeselnik, like, I'm like, he's not all these things. I can see that's just his character. Like, he's just saying this to like shock people, and his jokes are like, he'll have a big long story, and then at the very end it'll take a very sharp left turn, and he'll like shock you with the punchline. Like, that's his like style of comedy, and I'm like,
that's a shtick.
Yeah, he's like, he's not a sexist, he's not a racist, he's not a homophobe. Like, maybe sometimes he'd tell these jokes, but you have to like see behind it and almost like think about what he's saying and think about the process that he's going through. So when I started thinking about this like Rugby Sevens comment, and I started thinking about what the difference between like hate speech and regular speech, I guess, was, well, this is like the first time on Guide that we're going to come up with like a guide to something where it's like, there's like a thought process to going through something, because I'm one of these people now. Like, if I see hate speech, I would like to like educate people. If someone says something hateful, you would like to stop that. That's like,
sure,
a good thing to be doing, And like I say, these people that are like spreading the vitriol and hate and like racists and homophobes, I don't think I'll be wasting my time like trying to educate these people. But when something like that is like said, and it does like prick my ears up, I'm gonna like go through like a process now where it's like, is this person like immediately trying to offend someone? Are they trying to say something hateful? Is it their intention to be doing this? And it's like, the answer is yes. It's like, tick, hate speech, but it's so far off hate speech that can't do anything about it, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Second of all, it's like, is this person like just being a bit uneducated? Is what they're saying like, is what they're saying actually harmful? Is it doing some sort of like damage, maybe even unknowingly? And if the answer is yes, I'm like, tick, hate speech. But then you can be like, whoa, this is where like I can maybe like intervene.
Yeah, you might not realize, but
yeah, come in and be like, oh, this actually means that, or the word half caste actually means half pure. Maybe you shouldn't be using that word. Because as soon as people know stuff like that, they're like, oh.
They'll probably feel a bit stupid, to be honest, a lot of the time.
As soon as when I found out what that word meant, I was like, fucking hell.
Fuck's sake, can't
believe how...
Try to think back to who has said that in front of,
Yeah, I'm like writing down a list of people that have said that to like message them on Facebook and be like, do you know you're a fucking hater?
You get them, Scott.
Yeah, but like looking at words like that, you're like, shit, like you don't know, and it is literally just ignorance. Like, that's the kind of group that like I'm thinking about like targeting with this kind of stuff, where you can just bring up something stupid like that, and you can maybe like stop it at the same time. Like, know that this is hate speech, but maybe the person also didn't mean it, so they probably shouldn't be. The cancel culture engine should really leave them alone, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then third of all, you have to think about the person that's saying it, especially if it's a joke. You have to look at the person as they're like delivering it, and
look for like disgust responses. Like this basic human fucking face-to-face interaction. Pick up on that type of stuff. It's obviously that's not much less clear when it comes to text, but there are cues that human beings we're able to pick up really, really, really well when it comes to the message that people are trying to convey.
Yeah. The way that it's construed, and the person that's saying it, if they actually hold these opinions, or if it's like clearly a joke. I'd probably, to be honest, if you're telling like edgy jokes, I'd probably like watch the company that you're telling it in. Like, if you're like known for it, it's like, I guess that like people that know you and know that you tell this kind of jokes would be like fine. But if you're like I wouldn't say stuff like that to someone that you just met. You know, somebody you just met on a night out or like at your work or something like that, for example. You know, but I think about the disguised toast example. It's like he's kind of known for those kind of jokes in his community, sort of thing. Although I guess he has to get that reputation
somehow,
if you know what I mean. So, like, yeah, I'm going through all these things, and even looking at the people that are like calling out this like hate speech, like giving them like steps, because not everything that's like spoken, or that's like not every comment on like masculinity and femininity, not every comment on like sex or race is like hate speech, you know. But a lot of that seems to be like branched into the same group right now.
Exactly.
And it seems to be people that are either virtue signaling and trying to get one up, and people that are saying it. But I do genuinely believe there are a bunch of people out there right now that think that every comment out there is like hate speech. I genuinely believe that there are people that probably heard that Rugby Sevens comment and they did go to Twitter or Facebook or something like that, and they were like, "Oh, that's offensive," and like they tried to like correct it, and like they just jumped through all those stages, you know.
These are fucking drones, man. These people don't think, you know. These are people that have been programmed by what they see on fucking social media and the news to act a certain way. Like, I can't even describe how much contempt I hold for these people that don't think before they go ahead and spread their thoughts into the world. It's absolutely mental, but it's something you see so frequently.
It's one of these things where like someone says something along those lines, and as soon as you ask that person like why they've said this or why they've done it, they just immediately crumble because they haven't thought their actions through. And I think that could be the case with like the vast majority of like what is construed to be like hate speech now as well. Like people just don't think about what they're saying. They don't think about what it means. Like the word half caste. I'm like, nobody ever thought about what it meant. They just knew that it meant mixed race. Or they knew that it was like slang for mixed race, at least. They didn't know like where the word came from or anything like that. Because these things, people probably shouldn't be lambasted for these things, but they also probably should be corrected at the same time, like made aware that they are spreading like some form of hate speech.
Yeah, that's what really can be done. It's because it's like that's the main message I have, is that all you can do is spread the awareness and then let them make the choice. You know, they'll make that choice and they'll deal with the repercussions of it, and they'll either learn or they won't learn. But like, that's all you need to do. Any more attention you give them is exactly what they want, because they'll know they'll be getting a rise out of anyone. They'll probably actually think that if you were trying to educate them and like they made a racist joke, they're probably thinking that you were some type of person offended by this instead of just a random guy trying to offend it. So yeah, it's one of those things that just leave these stupid people alone. I think though, when it comes to, we're talking about this like spectrum of people that you're either like legitimately racist to like people making jokes, and you've got the middle ground of like people that are a little bit racist but maybe people that are uneducated. I tend to find that like the people that are uneducated and the people that are racist have like a lot of crossover, to be honest with you. It's like people that say things and they don't know why they said it. Like I remember like one of my new flatmates, he mentioned how he mentioned about how all the Scottish people come down to England to take their jobs. You know, and I was like really pissed off about it. I was like, these fucking foreigners type of thing. And he was talking about Scots. You know, it wasn't even talking about fucking people from like off the island.
He was talking about you.
He was talking about me. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like he said it, and he was like, "Oh, not you, of course." And I like tried to say to him that like, you know, that's not how this works. You know, it's like there's jobs here to be taken. You guys aren't getting them, type of thing. You know, and like he just like, it was clear one of those ones that he said it out of ignorance, but there was no desire to learn. You know, and that was where it was like, oh, that's probably racist behavior right there. That's not someone that's just ignorant. That's someone that's deliberately ignorant, you know, which is like another category.
But then that's one of those things where like the little Coast Guard in your mind put up the red flag and was like,
right, yeah.
I was like, maybe we don't want to be like, this guy's my flatmate, but maybe I'll avoid him. You know, like I'm not. I'm not going to be rushing for drinks. I'm not going to be going to the pub with him this weekend. You know what I'm saying? Like that's, and I guess is that the upside to hate speech, where you're like people
it's like
seclude them, like sort of like just put them in a little pen and like fucking ignore them, you know? And see the thing is as well, I often find that when you try and educate someone who is, if someone says hate speech and then you try and educate them on why that is hate speech, and it turns out they are just like racist or something like that, they just get angry, you know?
Yeah, exactly. They just get frustrated because you don't agree with them.
As soon as you stop like giving them the reaction, you know, you try and educate them, it fails, you find that they're just racist, and then you be like, okay, well, I'm done with you now. They get really pissed off. That's like immediate anger, you know, and it's like there's not a lot more that a person can do for me to be like, yeah, we're not going to be friends, are we? Sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. You're right. Well, that's the thing. It's like what we said during like that social media episode. There is in all interactions there's an extent of public moderation, and unfortunately and you know what, this is a great example of it, and to tie in with what I'm always harping on about, I really believe that the only way that this can effectively work itself out is by letting people spread these stupid views in the first place, because that's the only way that we can learn, potentially educate, or like you said, that's when we know to leave them alone and just section them off, type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.